this year. It's going to be very, Earl and I are going to have a debate on the 18th of December. Did we have to drop the atomic bomb? We're going to throw it out to the audience. You vote on it. We make our points, and you vote on it. That's the way I like when we audience participation. All right, today we'll start with Dr. Lowell Zide. Next week we're going to have Paul Pinow is going to talk about Benedict Arnold, the first American trader. On the 18th, Earl and I are going to go about the atomic bomb. And November 25th, we're going to have the history of military animals by John Studenfield. So the month of November is well taken care of, and a myriad of subjects. All right, now, at this point in time, Erwin is going to introduce Dr. Zide. Erwin, you're on.
Okay, thank you. My pleasure to introduce Lowell. He's born in Philadelphia, graduated from Central High School, received a bachelor and master's degrees in physics from the University of Pennsylvania. He worked at RCA in research and development on missiles and computers. Then he went to medical school, graduating in 1961. He's board certified in family practice and in occupational, environmental, and preventative medicine. Lowell, you're on.
Can you hear me, or?
Yes.
All right. All right, today we're going to discuss, basically, is the Constitution outdated? I'm going to discuss some historic facts. You can't hear it?
Yes.
I'm going to discuss some historic facts. Some historic facts about the Constitution. And then we'll discuss how the Constitution is interpreted, and then give some suggested changes to the Constitution. We'll first discuss some historical facts about the Constitution that many of us maybe aren't aware of. I'm sure some are, but many I was unaware of. Are you aware that the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land of the United States and serves as the foundation of government in the United States? However, there are things you likely never knew about the Constitution, and here are some of them. The goal of the framers. What was the goal of the framers? The goal of the framers of the Constitution was twofold. Namely, one, to structure the government in such a way that it would meet the needs and aspirations of the people, and at the same time check the arbitrary exercise of political power. Second, the separation of powers was designed to prevent any one group from gaining control of the national government. Now, the age and length of the Constitution. The U.S. Constitution, drafted and signed in 1787, remains the world's oldest national constitution still in use. At the time of the writing, the document was only 4 parchment pages long and contained just 4,400 words with the added amendments. The current Constitution clocks in at 7,762 words. Just as a sidelight, by the time the Constitutional Convention, 81-year-old Benjamin Franklin was in such poor health that he needed to be carried in an enclosed chair to the State House where the signing of the Constitution was to be held. The chair was supported by 4 prisoners from a nearby jail. Next, we'll discuss the President's title. The Constitution does not indicate how the nation's president should be addressed. After the inauguration of President George Washington in 1789, the Senate considered a few different appellations. Vice President John Adams suggested the following appellations, which including His Elective Majesty, His Mightiness, and even His Highness, the President of the United States of America and the Protector of the Liberties. Next, the Founding Fathers didn't actually intend to write a constitution. They intended to tweak the Articles of Confederation. The Constitutional Convention was held in Philadelphia from May to September 1787, and was attended by delegates from all of the 13 original states except Rhode Island, and was initially convened, as it stated, to tweak the Articles of Confederation. However, after reviewing the Articles of Confederation, the delegates came to the conclusion that an entirely new document was needed. Another sidelight, Thanksgiving was actually created by George Washington as a way to thank God for the Constitution. It was a celebration for the new form of government. The first national Thanksgiving was observed on Thursday, November 6, 1789, by proclamation of George Washington. The holiday was established by the President as, quote, a day of public thanksgiving and prayer to be observed by acknowledging with grateful hearts the many signal favors of Almighty God, especially by affording them an opportunity peaceably to establish a form of government for their safety and happiness. So Thanksgiving preceded what we call today. Another fact, the Constitution doesn't say anything about the U.S. being a democracy. The U.S. is framed as a republic. Nowhere in the Constitution is the United States called a democracy because the Founding Fathers thought that a direct democracy was a dangerous form of government that privileged the sentiment of the majority over the rights of the minority. Instead, the Constitution frames the United States as a republic, where citizens elect representatives to make decisions for them rather than directly. Now, I'm going to give you a sidelight, a whimsical definition of democracy that Johnny Carson once said. He said, quoting, he said, democracy is buying a big house you can't afford with money you don't have to impress people you wish were dead. Unlike communism, democracy does not mean having just one ineffective political party. It means having two ineffective political parties. Democracy is welcoming people from other lands and giving them something to hold on to, usually a mop or a leaf blower. It means with proper timing and scrupulous bookkeeping, anyone can die owing the government a huge amount of money. Democracy means free television, not good television, but free. And finally, democracy is the eagle on the back of the $1 bill, with 13 arrows in one claw, 13 leaves on the branch, 13 tail feathers, and 13 stars over its head. This signifies when the white man came over this country, it was bad luck for the Indians, bad luck for the trees, bad luck for wildlife, and lights out for the American eagle. As another sidelight, Benjamin Franklin wanted the turkey, not the bald eagle, to be become the alien symbol of America. In a letter to his daughter, he described the turkey as a, quote, respectable bird and withal a true original native of America, which is true. It was first described about 400 BC by the Aztecs, and then later in the United States about 200 BC. However, the people liked it so much that they imported it to Europe, and it's popular in Europe. Now, how did turkey get its name? When the pilgrims came over, they saw the bird, but they realized it was a pheasant. It doesn't fly, and it has tail like a pheasant. So they used the Arabic word turkey, T-U-R-K-I-I, to call it turkey, and eventually became, we call it, turkey. Now we're going to discuss some undemocratic aspects of the initial U.S. Constitution. We don't think about the Constitution being undemocratic, but there are 5 primary undemocratic aspects of the Constitution. 1, the tolerance of slavery. It was necessary to ensure the cooperation and participation of southern states and only outlawed after the Civil War. Suffrage. The voting rights of women, African Americans, and Native Americans were either not protected specifically or specifically abridged. In 1870, the 15th Amendment prohibited denial of suffrage due to race. And finally, in 1920, the 19th Amendment prohibited denial of suffrage due to sex. In 1964, the 24th Amendment prohibited poll taxes which are being used in some states to discriminate against African Americans without explicit racial provisions. Another undemocratic aspect of the Constitution didn't cover: election of the president. Article 2, Section 1, established the Electoral College, which gives each state a number of electors proportional to its representation in Congress, which, because of each state has 2 senators, is not proportional to population. I think today, if the Electoral College was proposed today, it would be founded today, it probably would be found unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court. But at that time, they had it in there. Representation in the Senate, we just mentioned. Each state gets 2 senators, regardless of population. This is known as the Connecticut Compromise, and was incorporated in the Constitution to secure continued participation of the smaller states. Election of the senators in Article 1, Section 3, declared senators would be appointed directly by state legislatures. In 1913, the 17th Amendment changed the system so senators were properly elected in staggered statewide votes. And finally, another undemocratic aspect of the Constitution is the judicial power. In the United States, judges have the power to rule unconstitutional any law or regulation, even if duly approved by Congress and signed by the President. Judges are appointed, not elected, for life, which makes them independent. Some feel the judiciary has used its rather unconstrained authority to intentionally make national policy through rulings. Here are some other aspects of the, see if we get to it, of the Constitution. I can't find it. Let's see if we can read this side. Here it is. Some of the facts about, historical facts about the Constitution. There were several spelling and grammar mistakes in the Constitution. The assistant clerk of Pennsylvania legislature wrote out the final copy of the Constitution after the convention was adjourned on September 15, 1787. After completing the transcription, he went back and corrected various omissions and misspellings, keeping a record of the changes so that no one would think the erasure marks were the result of illegitimate attempts to change the Constitution. One of the more glaring mistakes was made by Alexander Hamilton. In the process of managing the signatures of the document, he accidentally spelled Pennsylvania with one N. Also, another historic fact, two famous founding fathers, never signed the Constitution. Though they are usually considered to be founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams never actually signed the Constitution. Both were serving as diplomats in Europe at the time of the Constitutional Convention. Another fact, the original Constitution almost limited the size of the Army to 3,000 troops. During the drafting of the Constitution, one delegate was against the idea of maintaining a large standing army. According to James Madison's account of the drafting of the Constitution, the delegate proposed that there should, quote, there should not be kept up in time of peace more than 2,000 or 3,000 troops. George Washington was against the measure and quipped that there should also add a stipulation that no invading army could number more than 3,000 troops. Okay, wait a second, we'll get back. Okay. Next, we're going to discuss impeachment in the Constitution. Adding the ability to impeach the President to the Constitution because Benjamin Franklin supported
Hello.
adding the ability to impeach a president of the
Hello.
Constitution.
Louder, please. They're having trouble back here
Okay.
hearing you.
Benjamin Franklin supported adding the ability to impeach a president in the Constitution because he thought it would prevent assassinations. He argued that assassination would leave a president, quote, not only deprived of his life, but of the opportunity of vindicating his character. We have a lot of characters that have been presidents. In the Federalist paper, Alexander Hamilton clarified the grounds on which a sitting president should be impeached. Quote, those offenses which proceed from the misconduct of public men, namely the abuse or violation of some public trust. The framers of the Constitution intentionally made it difficult to remove a sitting president from the office. Only 2 presidents have been formally impeached by Congress, Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton. And no U.S. president has ever been removed from office through impeachment. In addition to Johnson and Clinton, only 2 other presidents have faced formal impeachment inquiries in the House of Representatives. They are Richard Nixon and presently Donald Trump. Many other presidents have been threatened with impeachment by political foes without gaining any traction in Congress. Examples. There were even rumblings about impeaching the nation's first president, George Washington, by those who opposed his policies. Those calls, however, did not reach the point of becoming formal resolutions or charges. John Tyler was the first president to face impeachment charges. He was nicknamed as ascendancy after assuming and ascending the presidency after William Henry Harris died just 30 days in office. Tyler was widely unpopular with his own Whig party. A House representative from Virginia submitted a petition for Tyler's impeachment, but it was never taken up by the House for a vote. Between 1922 and 1923, a Congress had introduced impeachment resolutions against Herbert Hoover. Both were eventually tabled by large margins. More recently, both Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush were subject of impeachment resolution submitted by Henry B. Gonzalez, a Democrat representative from Texas. But none of the resolutions were taken up for a vote in the House Judiciary Committee. George W. Bush faced a slightly more serious impeachment threat when Democratic Representative Dennis Kucinich introduced a House resolution charging Bush with war crimes. The House voted 251 to 166 to refer the resolution to the House Judiciary Committee. But the House Speaker, Speaker Pelosi, said any talk of impeachment was, quote, off the table. Finally, Barack Obama was also accused of high crimes and misdemeanors, befitting impeachment. In 2012, Republican Representative Walter Jones submitted a House new resolution charging the president with authorizing military action in Libya without the consent of Congress. The resolution referred to the Judiciary Committee, where it was never brought for a vote. Now we're going to discuss some comments what is considered to be an impeachable offense. Let me find the page and we'll get started on that. Impeachable offense. Again, today, what's considered an impeachable offense? Today, any impeachable offense is whatever a majority of the House of Representatives considers it to be at any given moment in history. So there's no really one set thing. Anything they feel they can do what they want. The Constitution itself seems to support the view that high crimes and misdemeanors don't necessarily have to be crimes in the ordinary sense. Okay? With that. Okay. Andrew Johnson was impeached for, he was against helping the South, he was more for helping the South get back on its feet, and the Northerners wanted to punish the Southerners. Johnson was impeached for endorsing rebels and rebel legislatures in the South, which he should have, firing competent people like Everett Stanton, abusing the pardoning privileges, pardoning a lot of people from the South, blocking and subverting civil rights legislation, and obstructing the ratification of the 14th Amendment. Now, the 14th Amendment has various things in it. It says anyone born in the United States is a U.S. citizen. It also engaged, he said, any persons, 10 U.S. citizens who were engaged in the rebellion, the Civil War, could not become president, vice president, or elected to the House, U.S. Senate or the House of Representatives. And another factor added there, it was included not paying off the debt by the states which seceded from the Union. So they were the reasons why he was impeached. Again, he was against hurting the South so much, but the Northerners which wanted to take it out on the South for the war. And Bill Clinton, why was he impeached? Is that a presidential thing? He was impeached for lying about having sex with Lewinsky. Now I've got just a comment to make. Throw it out to you for thinking. He says Clinton was impeached in the second term of the presidency, after which he would be ineligible no longer to run for president. He can't run for a third term. All right? Anything? The talk of impeachment presently going on is in the first term of office. What would happen if the present president was impeached, removed from office by impeachment, and then running for president for a second term, was reelected? He's been impeached from that office, now he's president again. Okay? It seems to be legal, since impeachment is not listed in the U.S. Constitution as a disqualifier to run for president. Or it could necessarily maybe become a Supreme Court case, we don't know, but that's the way it is now. Just as a sidelight, governors are the equivalent of the president at the state level. So they're liable for impeachment too. 12 state governors have been impeached over the years. 8 were convicted and removed from office, and 1 resigned. In 2008, Governor Eliot Spitzer of New York resigned. The last impeachment was in 2009, where Governor Rod Blagojevich of Illinois was impeached for trying to seek the Senate seat vacated by President Obama when he became President of the United States. The Illinois State Senate ended with a unanimous 59-0 vote to impeach him, against him. He's thrown out of office. So you see, impeachment itself is it's always been a political aspect thing. With Johnson, he wanted to not be so harsh on the South. Clinton wasn't a political thing, but maybe it was because he lied and they didn't like him, so that's another aspect of it. Now I'm going to go into next, after impeachment. How is the Constitution interpreted? How does one interpret the Constitution? What are the appropriate sources of authority to guide interpretation of the Constitution, and what weight should be assigned to the various appropriate sources? There are 5 sources that have guided interpretation of the Constitution. First, the text and structure of the Constitution. 2, the intention of those who drafted, voted to propose, or voted to ratify the provisions in question. Prior precedents, usually judicial. 4, social, political, and economic consequences of alternative interpretations. And finally, natural law. Now, natural law, higher law, God's law, is now only infrequently suggested as an interpretive guide, even though many of the framers of the Constitution recognized its appropriateness. Persons who favor reliance on originalist sources, text, and intentions are commonly called originalists, believe it or not. Persons who favor giving a more substantial weighting to precedent, consequences or natural law are called non-originalists. In practice, disagreement between originalists and non-originalists often concerns whether to apply heightened judicial scrutiny to certain fundamental rights that are not explicitly protected by the Constitution, such as abortion and gay rights. It should be noted that Thomas Jefferson wrote that, quote, "The earth belongs always to the living generation, not to the dead. Each generation has a right to choose for itself the form of government it believes most promotive of its own happiness." He further stated, "It's for the peace and good of mankind that the Constitution should expire every 19 or 20 years. If it's enforced longer, it's an act of force, not an act of right." The reason that was 19 to 20 years was the length of a generation in Jefferson's time. Now we're going to discuss reasons to be an originalist, to just interpret the Constitution, what the framers of the Constitution meant. Originalism reduces the likelihood that unelected judges will cede the reins of power from elected representatives. Originalism is, in the long run, better preserves the authority of the court. Non-originalism allows too much room for judges to impose their own subjective and elitist values. Judges need neutral, objective criteria to make legitimate decisions. By understanding the reasoning and words of the framers and ratifiers of any part of the constitutional clause, provide those neutral criteria. Leaving it to the people to amend the Constitution when need be, promotes serious public debate about government and its limitations. Originalism better respects the notion of the Constitution as a binding contract. And finally, originalism more often forces legislatures to reconsider possible repeal or amend their own bad laws rather than leave it to the courts to get rid of them. Now, what's the reasons to be a non-originalist? The framers of the Constitution in Philadelphia indicated they did not want their specific intentions to control interpretation. No written Constitution can anticipate all the means that the government might in the future use to oppress people, as is sometimes necessary for judges to fill in those gaps. That would be gay marriages, gay rights, abortions, things like that. Intentions of the framers are various, sometimes transient, and often impossible to determine. The text is often ambiguous, and judicial precedents can be found to support either side. In such cases, why not produce the result which best promote the public good? Another reason to be a non-originalist allows judges to head off crises that can result from inflexible interpretation of a provision of the Constitution which no longer serves its original purpose. The amendment process is too difficult and cannot be relied upon to do this. Next, non-original allows the Constitution to evolve to match more enlightened understandings of matters of social and attitudinal changes, such as abortion, women's rights, transsexuals, homosexuals. Originalists lose the larger purpose of the Constitution, which was the protection of liberty, which should be the main focus. Okay. Now we'll go into, is the Constitution outdated, based upon all these facts and things we just went over. The U.S. Constitution is 230 years old. If the Constitution were a person, it'd be long dead, or at very least extremely frail and completely out of touch with the realities of modern life. Is the Constitution any different? Here are some arguments in favor of the view that the Constitution is outdated. When the Constitution was drafted, not only were there no cheeseburgers, cell phones, or MP players, which some people today regard as necessities, but there were no automobiles, no airplanes, no electricity, no TV, no computers. It really was a different world, and actually a totally different world than it is today. Social values were different too. Slavery was widespread. The death penalty was unquestioned. Women had fewer rights, and gay sex was outlawed. A constitution emanating from such alien background can remain relevant only if it's constantly reinterpreted by the Supreme Court to keep abreast of changing values. But a lot of people reject the approach, and here are some of the arguments against the view that the Constitution is outdated. They're against it. They're saying it's not. The core values enshrined in the Constitution are timeless and represent the underpinnings of the country as originally conceived. The Constitution affords stability in law, government, and society. Only by sticking closely to the original meaning of the Constitution can the Supreme Court achieve a uniform approach to it. A proliferation of inconsistent interpretations of the Constitution could lead people to lose respect for the Supreme Court and for the Constitution itself. It's wrong for judges to second-guess the framers of the Constitution, because that be amount to changing the meaning of the Constitution. The Supreme Court is not allowed to change the Constitution. That can be done only by elaborate process of amendment as laid down in the Constitution itself. As for updating the Constitution, why should a group of 9, or all too often 5 out of 9, middle-aged to possibly ancient judges have the right to decide what values are currently fit and proper? Isn't that an exercise of lawmaking or legislation which is reserved by the Constitution to Congress and the President's approval? And why should such freedoms as like abortion and same-sex marriage be regarded as having anything to do with the Constitution at all? These issues and others should be settled with legislation, as legislators represent the majority opinion. So there's arguments for and against whether the Constitution is outdated. Now here are a few suggestions I put in to possibly add to the Constitution to make some changes. A balanced budget. Go into that. The federal government consumes nearly 25% of all goods and services produced each year by the American people. Yearly deficits routinely exceed $1 trillion. There is not enough money on the planet to make good on all the federal government's obligations. In 1992, U.S. debt stood at 62% of our national annual gross domestic product, or GDP. In 2009, our national debt reached 82% of our GDP, and this year it will be at least 106% of our GDP. In 1981, the U.S. debt hit $1 trillion. President Ronald Reagan tried to illustrate to Congress how much $1 trillion is. He said, quote, "If you had a stack of $1,000 bills in your hand, only 4 inches high, you'd be a millionaire. $1 trillion would be a stack of $1,000 bills 67 miles high." And in March 2019, when the U.S. debt hit $22 trillion, that's a stack of $1,000 bills 1,474 miles high. That's nearly $66,000 for every U.S. citizen. The interest on the debt is paid out of our tax dollars, and the tax dollars our children will pay in the future. Opponents of a balanced budget amendment say deficit spending causes no real long-term harm to an ever-growing economy, and that Congress should approve a balanced budget each year without actually having an amendment. Next, eliminate the Electoral College. Critics point out that the Electoral College was created at a time when the U.S. seemed too large and communications too slow and difficult for every citizen to become accurately informed about a presidential race. In addition, others say our system of electing a president has worked pretty well for more than 2 centuries. And also be reminded, there is no constitutional right to vote for presidents in the Constitution. It remains up to the states to determine how their voters choose the members of the Electoral College. It has been suggested that the Electoral College be overhauled with more populated states receiving additional electors, so that a candidate who loses the popular vote can no longer become president. Why not abolish it entirely? Well, The state-based electoral college isolates and simplifies recounts. Imagine how hopeless our predicament would be if the 2000 Florida recount election had to be conducted nationwide. So that does serve a purpose. Now I'm going to give you some sidelights about it. Are you aware that the vice president must meet the same qualifications for office as the president, including being 35 years old and a national-born citizen? The president and vice president can be from the same state, but if they are, electoral voters from that state can only vote for one of them, not both of them. If there's no presidential majority in the electoral college, it goes to the House of Representatives to elect the president. And each state gets only one vote. The candidate needs 26 states out of the 50 to be elected president. If there's no vice presidential majority in the electoral college, it goes to the Senate to elect the vice president. The candidate needs 51 votes out of the 100 senators to be elected vice president. The winner-take-all arrangement is not necessarily part of the electoral college. It's not laid down by the Constitution, and it's not used by all states. Another change could be guns and gun control. A suggested amendment could be the right of the people to bear arms reasonable for hunting, sport, collecting, and personal defense. Automatic firing weapons are not permitted. Term limits for Congress. No person shall serve more than 12 years as a member of Congress, whether such service is exclusively in the House or Senate or combined in both houses. Term limits for the Supreme Court justices. No person may serve as Chief Justice or Associate Justice of the Supreme Court for more than a combined total of 12 years. Now, the next one is called the supermajority override, giving the states the power to override a Supreme Court decisions by a 2/3 vote majority of the states, and having a 7-2 supermajority of the Supreme Court, not presently, which is always 5-4, for any decisions striking down laws made by Congress and signed by the President, or made by state legislation and signed by the governor. They would need a 7-2 vote, not a 5-4 vote, to be declared unconstitutional. Another comment would be protect the vote. Require a valid photographic ID demonstrating evidence of citizenship issued by the state government for the state in which the voter resides for primary and general elections for president, vice president, member of the Congress. The above also applies to those voting by mail, absentee ballots. States are to provide the photographic ID at no cost to individuals who are unable to afford the fees associated with the document. Another comment here, last thing, creating a more representative Senate. According to the 2010 census, the smallest 25 states of the Union account for 16% of the United States population. In contrast, they hold 50% of the seats, 50 out of the 100 seats, and only represent 16% of the population. More specifically, a senator from Wyoming represents 282,000 people. The senator from California represents 66 times as many, or 18.7 million people. It doesn't get more undemocratic than that. Stunningly, just 17% of the current population, of the current American population, representing just 26 states instead of 25, elects a majority of the Senate. That's because, as the state gets, before you mentioned, California gets only, should get 66 times more rather than just 2 senators. The larger states have 80% of the population, but they get nothing without the approval of lately populated states, who represent 17%. In the beginning, he says, in the beginning, the population differential, the large and small states, and their unfairness was far less. He said, when started, a compromise with those states' rights lost the pretext with the ratification of the 17th Amendment, which gave people not the state legislative right to elect representatives to the upper chamber. Today, the Senate is an undemocratic relic where 41 senators, representing just 11% of the nation's population, can use the filibuster to block almost anything and bring the government to its knees. The two-senator allotment in each state also makes it essentially impossible to change the makeup of states or admit new ones, like District of Columbia or Puerto Rico, for statehood. But today, the structure of the upper chamber is completely outmoded. A fairer Senate could be built by granting the 10 states with the greatest population 2 additional senators, and the next 15 most populous states 1 senator each, for a total of 85 senators. Now I'll finish that. I'll give you a couple of sidelights and then we'll be finished. I don't know if you're aware that in the Senate there are 5 people who were born outside the United States. And the qualification, they fill in the qualification. You have to attain the age of 30 years, 9 years a citizen, and then be an inhabited state. For a congressman, it's, age 25 and 5 years a citizen. The ones, I just want to give you an idea of how different countries that these people represent. So 5% of the Senate, one is a Mazi Hironi. She's from Hawaii. She was born in Japan. A Bennett Michael from Colorado, born in India. Ted Cruz was born in Canada. A Tammy Duckworth was born in Thailand. And a Chris Van Hol was born in Pakistan. So there's 5 people born outside the United States. Now, as far as the House of Representatives, there are 24 representatives out of 250 that are born outside the United States. And that represents 9.6%, about 10%, nearly twice the amount percentage that the Senate has. I'll give you just a few examples and we'll be done. From New York, people want people from New York. I don't know if you know Adriana Abelard, was born a Dominican Republican. A St. Patrick Maloney was born in Canada. A Alveo Cerez was born in Cuba. There's 2 foreign-born House representatives from Florida. They're both the Democrats. There's 3 Republicans and 21 Democrats. The ones from Florida are a Debbie Marcuzzo. She was born in Ecuador. And another one was Stephanie Murphy. She was born in Vietnam. So again, there's in Congress, there are 18 different countries represented in Congress through the people who've been elected there, although they don't represent that, but I'm sure their background somehow are influenced to some extent by being born in a foreign country. Okay, that's the end. I just wanted to give you some thoughts about the Constitution, how it was put together, what the thoughts are today of changing and updating the Constitution. And I hope you all learned something. I know I did. And I'll take any questions if there's any questions. I have some other comments I can make, but we'll let it go. Other comments, again, there's a big argument, should we increase the size of the Supreme Court? Through the years, the Supreme Court has gone up and down, 7, 8, 9. Every year there's a lot of changes in the Supreme Court. He says, and the conclusion was that maybe it should be tweaked, because from the beginning, when I guess Washington put people in the Supreme Court, it was all political. So it hasn't changed. So they say, oh, it's all political, to put this guy in the Supreme Court, of course it's political, it's political. It's always been political through the years of presidents appointing people to the Supreme Court. You know, the only president that was, he became a Supreme Court justice, was Taft. Yeah. Taft became a Supreme Court justice. And Tyler, who was ready to be impeached, he became a senator after he was president. I'll give you an example of something here. The again, about impeachment. You know, what is an impeachable defense? I'll try to outline it itself. Say after the Civil War, Andrew
Johnson.
Johnson, but the high school. Oh, here's no. I'll give you two examples. He said the British Parliament invented impeachment, and the American framers institution as a means of saving the respective constitution from tyranny or catastrophic management by heredity. Both action and inaction of a chief magistrate, especially dangerous in the republic, must be impeachable. Every conduct motivated by a sincerely deeply held principle can be constitutional high crime. Now here's one. He said, Ben Butler made precisely this point during the Johnson impeachment. Suppose that in 1861, prior to the Civil War, when secession fever started to break out, the president had not been Abraham Lincoln, but a man who, whether moved far by fear or honest, by perverted political theory, refused to immobilize the president, the country against the rebellion. The states were succeeding. Could he be held as the principle of constitution of high crime by not keeping the country together? This president said, let them succeed, I don't care, let them do what they want, I'm not going to have any civil war, and let it go. Would that be a high crime and succeeded? He said another one is, suppose the nation's highest Supreme Court in the Brown versus Board of Education ordered desegregation of the American schools, and the president ordered out federal troops not to enforce the order, but to suppress protests by black citizens who sought to avenge the order by enrolling in the schools. So instead of supporting the Supreme Court decision, he said, no, I'm going to support the whites, and we're not going to let the blacks get into the schools. And the troops there kept them out. Is that being impeachable thing? So you can see that what impeachment is just what happens to be at that time and what Congress feels is impeachable. And again, everybody says, oh, it's political. It's always been political. Supreme Court's been political, and impeachment's been political. Not because, and there are really no high crimes per se.
You said the Supreme
I
Court.
can't hear you.
You said the Supreme Court can be denied by the state. You just made that comment in your speech.
Supreme Court.
And you're saying the states had the power to deny the Supreme Court.
Well, I'm saying that that's an amendment where the super override majority, where 2/3 of the states say a law was passed by Congress and Congress, it's unconstitutional, but 2/3 of the states vote that they accept it and want it to stay as a regular law.
Oh, it's not
They can
2/3
overrule
of
the
the one
Supreme
state.
Court.
It's not
And also
2/3
require that the Supreme Court can't say anything signed by the President and Congress made by a 5-4 decision to say, oh, that's unconstitutional, which would be more political, or have a 7-2 vote. If there was a 7-2 vote for them to do it, before they could say it's unconstitutional, not a 5-4 vote like it is today. Yeah.
I don't know if you've dealt with this or not, but it's the question of the relationship between the state and the Congress. And I shouldn't say that, the states and the federal government. How did they work the priorities when there is a difference?
Well, they had there that anything, as I think it's the 11th Amendment or 10th Amendment, anything that is not covered by the U.S. Constitution is reserved for the rights of the states. Divorce is not in there, so the rights of the states. Gay marriage is not in there, your right for the states, you know, with that. You know, homosexuals, transsexuals, all that, they said that's reserved for the states. But the Supreme Court has said, well, they take one of the amendments that is an abolition of the person's rights, therefore it goes under this amendment, as though it belongs in the U.S. Supreme Court, and that's why it was. Now, believe it or not, in Britain, when they had gay marriages, the Parliament didn't make the rule. They let it go for a vote, and the vote was positive, and that's it. There's been no riots about gay marriages in Britain. You see, the prince married a woman, a nice woman and everything. And there's no riots or anything, or it goes with it. Here in the United States, the Supreme Court makes a ruling and there's riots all over.
Wasn't the Constitution a document composed by a bunch of white guys who were property owners who wanted to protect their positions in this newly created country? And they wanted to assure that their heirs would inherit their positions in the new country. And it was they that created
Again,
this.
in England or in Britain, you have a right to become king and queen by you were born that way genetically. In the United States, they don't have it that way. Though John Quincy Adams and John Adams were related. But I would say that again at that time it was a white supremacist group of men. But that's why they left things out: suffrage, for Indians, and this and that and the other, the blacks. But they wanted to unite the country and get it on a setting, or a good setting. I would say that the people who have benefited from the government, shall we say, have done it under slyness, let's put it that way, hidden behind the scenes. Now today, I would say, I'm sure there was corruption in Washington's time, but today it's unprecedented, the corruption that goes on with our congressmen and with that. And I'm hiring family people to do the jobs of the government, saying this, that, and the other. The Congress has the right to inside trader, but that's all right. You're not, but Congress have inside trading. So unfortunately, it's up to the populace. See, the biggest problem with the populace is they have short memories, and they don't remember all the things that maybe people have done that really shouldn't be in office or any office. The other problem is that people have just one thing in their mind. Oh, I'm against this. And no matter what the other person's for, if he's against what I'm against, I'm voting for him, or everything else collapses around you. It's like, was it the guy playing the fiddle or Rome Burns? Well, we're getting rid of this here, but that. So it's up to the populace. So were they wrong that the populace is too naive to understand how to vote for the property people that will protect them? But again, today there's so much handouts that you have 1/3 of the people voting. They don't care as long as which party gives them the handouts. That's all right, as long as I get my handouts. Then you have maybe 2/3 battling each other as to who's right, who's wrong, etc. But it's the handouts that are controlling it too. People just don't vote because I'm getting all I want. I won't vote for it. Get this, I'll get that.
Should Bill Clinton have chosen the path of separation of church and state for his sexual misconducts? It's between him, God, Hillary, and the rest of you guys who are bad sexual misconduct have nothing to ask. And now I can concentrate my efforts of the USS Cole being blown up in the Persian Gulf, the bombing in Tanzania of a U.S. mission and one in Kenya. You're distracting me from performing my duties as president. And Henry Hyde, who fathered a child out of wedlock, pay for support for that child and be quiet. So there's a separation of church and state. This is my opinion. How do you feel?
Well, again, you learn how to defend yourself. Whenever there's anything bad against you, let it bounce off, and then tell how 10 other people are worse than you. That makes you right, because two wrongs make a right.
Right.
That's how they act today.
Well, it's between him, God,
and he did that. Well, that makes me
no.
right.
My opinion is it's the commandment number 7 in the 10 Commandments, and that's between God, the man, and the woman, and nobody else. And God will take care of it. And God did with Bill. Eventually he had to have 2 heart surgeries, and he's lucky he's still on this side. That's my opinion. He's suffering for it.
Did you know there was all homosexual praying?
He got to take back with God.
Yeah, he had his sister act as the woman, what do you call like,
No, not-
vodka. She was
Shouldn't
the
have
thing, he
taken
was on the
27
social, he
flights
had
on
him in
it.
there.
You shouldn't have
Epstein's plane,
Again, I would say this,
27
flights on Epstein's plane to have sex with young
Who,
children.
Bill
you
Clinton?
know,
Yes, Bill Clinton.
again, you
Well,
know,
he claims he only went twice, but it was 27
I
times.
didn't know.
You better read the book.
again, you know,
Okay. See you next week. Okay.